Still clashes in a forgotten age, a band of rogue mercenaries redraws the map of empires. This is the story of the Catalan Company, a formidable army of Aragonese and Almogavar warriors who answered to no king and became a law unto themselves. Their brutal and extraordinary saga unfolded across the Mediterranean, from the palaces of Constantinople to the swamps of Greece. You will discover the 25 pivotal moments that transformed these hired swords into empire breakers and legendary rulers. How did a group of soldiers for hire shatter the finest knights in Christendom? What drove them to betray their allies and seize a kingdom for themselves? The answers lie in a tale of ambition, vengeance, and sheer survival. What does it truly take for an army to build its own nation? King Peter III of Aragon saw a world of opportunity across the sea. In the year 1282, a massive rebellion known as the Sicilian Vespers exploded, tearing the island of Sicily from the control of the French House of Anjou. Peter seized this chance, claiming the throne for himself and plunging Aragon into a sprawling war for Mediterranean dominance. But to fight a distant war against a powerful enemy, he needed a new kind of soldier. He found them not in the castles of noble knights, but in the rugged frontier lands of his own kingdom. These were the Almogavars, imagined men who lived almost like the land itself, tough and unforgiving. They were shepherds, hunters, and bandits from the border regions, masters of a form of warfare that was completely alien to the era's chivalric ideals. They wore no heavy plate armor, relying instead on speed, stealth, and the brutal terrain. Their primary weapon was a pair of heavy javelins, which they would hurl with devastating force before closing in with a simple, sharp knife. They could move across impossible ground, launch ambushes from the shadows, and vanish before a knight could even lower his lance. This was the crucible that forged the Catalan Company. The long, grueling campaigns of the Sicilian War transformed these bands of rugged individuals into a single, cohesive, and utterly professional fighting force. They learned to trust each other completely, to follow the commands of their captains, and to understand their collective power. When the war for Sicily finally ended, they were not farmers or shepherds anymore. They were soldiers, and war was their only trade. This left them standing at a crossroads, a disciplined army with no war to fight, their skills sharpened and their appetites whetted. They were a weapon, loaded and ready, with no target in sight. Into this volatile mix of hardened veterans stepped a man whose ambition was as vast as their desperation. His name was Roger de Flor, a former Knight Templar cast adrift after the fall of Acre. He was a whirlwind of a man, part brilliant soldier, part silver-tongued showman, and he saw in the Almogavars not just a weapon, but an opportunity for an empire. Having witnessed the immense wealth of the East, he dreamed of carving out his own domain, and these fierce warriors were the key. He did not merely recruit them. He courted them, he spoke their language, understood their pride, and promised them not just pay, but plunder and land beyond their wildest dreams. His personal charisma was the catalyst that fused the disparate bands of fighters into a single, unified force. He gave them a new identity, the great company of the Catalans, bound not just by a common origin, but by a shared, audacious goal. Roger was more than a commander. He was the company's beating heart and its public face, the only man who could negotiate with emperors as an equal, and then turn to his men and share their rough campfire meals. His leadership provided the crucial structure they lacked, imposing discipline without breaking their fierce, independent spirit. He was the glue that held this volatile army together, the visionary who convinced thousands to follow him into the unknown. What kind of empire then would risk everything to hire such a dangerous and ambitious man? The Eastern Roman Empire was on the verge of collapse. From the ashes of the fallen Sultanate of Rum, a new and terrifying power had risen, the Ottoman Turks. Their relentless Ghazi warriors were slicing deep into Byzantine Anatolia, the empire's very heartland. The aging emperor, Andronikos II Palaiologos, watched his cities fall one by one. His own armies were depleted, his treasury nearly empty, and he was facing an enemy that fought with a ferocity he could not match. In his desperation, he made a decision that would echo through history. He would hire the wolves. In the year 1303, his representatives signed a staggering contract with Roger de Flor. The terms were almost unbelievable. The company was promised the pay of a full imperial army, a sum so vast it was measured in tens of thousands of gold hyperpera. Roger de Flor himself was granted the title of Grand Duke and was promised the hand in marriage of the emperor's own niece, a union that would elevate this mercenary captain to the highest ranks of Byzantine nobility. For the proud and ancient empire, this was a humiliating necessity. They were inviting a Western Christian army, viewed by many in Constantinople as barbaric and schismatic, directly into the core of the Orthodox world. It was a profound cultural and political gamble, a sign that their fear of the Turks now outweighed their distrust of the Latins. For the Catalan Company, this contract was their ultimate validation. It was their official, breathtaking entry onto the world stage. They were no longer just unemployed veterans. They were the hired saviors of the Roman Empire, a title that came with unimaginable wealth and prestige. But could such a desperate deal, forged in fear and funded with promises of gold, ever lead to anything but a bitter and violent reckoning? The Catalan Company's arrival in Anatolia was a collision of two worlds. They disembarked onto a landscape of burning villages and panicked refugees, the Turkish advance seeming unstoppable. But where the Byzantine army saw an invincible foe, Roger de Flor and his Almogavar saw an opportunity. They marched inland not to reinforce a crumbling fortress, but to seek a decisive fight. They found it near a place called Aulax. The Turkish army that faced them was everything the Byzantines feared, a vast host of cavalry, their armor glittering, their lances poised for a classic charge. They expected to sweep these ragged Westerners from the field. What they encountered was something entirely new. The Almogavars did not form a shield wall or a knightly line. Instead, they let out their signature war cry, a terrifying scream known as the alamk, designed to freeze the blood of both men and horses. As the Turkish cavalry thundered forward, the Catalans stood their ground, not with leveled spears, but with heavy javelins held high. Just before the impact, they let fly. These were not the light darts of skirmishers. Each javelin was a thick, iron-tipped spear, hurled with enough force to punch straight through a rider's armor or pierce the neck of his warhorse. The first charge crumpled into a chaos of falling steeds and screaming men. Before the Turks could regroup, the Almogavar surged forward. They moved with impossible speed, ducking under swinging swords to get inside an opponent's guard, where their long, cruel knives did their grim work. It was not a battle of chivalry, it was a slaughter of efficiency, a brutal demonstration of a warfare perfected against the harsh Spanish frontier. The Turkish army, bewildered and broken, fled the field. For the Byzantine Empire, the victory at Aulax was a miracle. The immediate Turkish pressure on Anatolia was relieved, and for a brief, hopeful moment, it seemed the empire might be saved. But that salvation came at a cost. The battle cemented the Catalan Company's reputation as the most effective and terrifying fighting force in the Mediterranean. They were celebrated as heroes in Constantinople, but that celebration was laced with a deep, unsettling fear. The emperor and his court now knew the truth. They had hired a weapon of immense power, but it was a weapon they did not understand and could not hope to control. The stunning victory at Aulax solved one crisis for the Byzantine Empire, but it created another far more dangerous one inside the palace walls. The Catalan Company was now a permanent and terrifying fixture in their lands, and the immense cost of their contract was bleeding the imperial treasury dry. Every gold hyperpera paid to these foreign soldiers was a coin not spent on the empire's own crumbling armies. Resentment began to fester among the Byzantine aristocracy, who watched these uncouth mercenaries grow rich and powerful while their own influence waned. This simmering distrust needed only a spark to ignite into open hostility. That spark arrived in the form of a different group of mercenaries, the Alans. These nomadic horsemen from the steppes had also been hired by the emperor, and they viewed the Catalans as rivals for both pay and prestige. In the year 1304, while the company was wintering in the city of Cyzicus, the trap was sprung. Under the cover of night, the Alan mercenaries launched a sudden, vicious attack on the unsuspecting Catalans. It was not a fair fight on an open field, but a brutal, close-quarters massacre in the city streets. The Catalans, caught completely by surprise, fought with their characteristic ferocity, but the damage was done. Hundreds of their comrades were slain in the confusion. The true horror of Cyzicus, however, was not in the bloodshed itself, but in what the Catalans immediately understood. The Alans would never have dared such a brazen assault without at least a tacit approval, or perhaps even the direct order of powerful figures within the Byzantine court. This was not a simple rivalry, it was a calculated attempt to weaken or destroy them. The betrayal at Cyzicus fundamentally rewired the mentality of the entire company. The initial hope of becoming honored imperial servants evaporated, replaced by a deep and permanent paranoia. They realized they were not respected allies, but expensive, dangerous pets that their master now wished to put down. Every smile from a Byzantine official became a potential lie. Every promise of payment felt like a prelude to another knife in the dark. Their cohesion tightened, their suspicion of outsiders became an article of faith, and their loyalty to the empire transformed into a cold and simmering hatred. They had saved Byzantium from its enemies, only to learn that they had now become the enemy themselves. How does an army react when the hand that feeds it is also the hand that holds the dagger? The massacre at Cyzicus demanded a response written not in words, but in blood. The Catalan Company did not retreat to lick its wounds. Instead, it transformed its grief and fury into a single, chilling purpose, the complete and utter destruction of the Alans. This was not to be another battle, it was to be a hunt. The Alans, confident after their nighttime assault, believed they had cowed the mercenaries. They could not have been more wrong. The Catalans, masters of the very terrain the Alans traversed, tracked their movements with a predator's patience. They waited for the perfect moment when the Alan forces were strung out and vulnerable on the march. Then they struck. The Almogavar war cry, the alarm tore through the air, a sound the Alans now understood was their death knell. What followed was a systematic, merciless slaughter. The Catalans showed no quarter, no desire for prisoners or ransom. Their objective was total annihilation, a message so stark and brutal that no one in the empire would ever dare betray them again. They dismantled the Alan army unit by unit, their javelins and knives working with a grim, practiced efficiency until the field was silent. This ruthless retaliation was a pivotal declaration of their new reality. They were no longer loyal servants of the empire. They were a power in their own right, a state of armed men who would enforce their own brutal justice. The revenge on the Alans sent a shockwave through the Byzantine court, a clear and terrifying warning: cross the Catalan Company, and you would not face a diplomatic complaint or a broken contract. You would face extinction. This act of vengeful fury cemented their identity as an army that would rather burn the world down than be victimized by it. Their survival now depended on being more feared than any enemy they faced. Revenge had secured their safety, but it could not fill their empty purses. The Byzantine court, terrified and resentful, simply stopped paying them. With no gold flowing from Constantinople and the Anatolian countryside picked clean, the Catalan Company faced a stark choice: disband and fade into poverty, or seize what they were owed. They chose to take their payment in land. In the spring of 1305, they turned their backs on Anatolia and marched north toward the coast, their sights set on one of the most valuable pieces of real estate in the entire empire, the fortress city of Gallipoli. Perched on the European shore of the Dardanelles, this was not just another town, it was the key. Whoever held Gallipoli controlled the narrow strait connecting the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara and, ultimately, to Constantinople itself. It was the primary maritime highway for all trade and military traffic between the empire's European and Asian territories. By occupying this citadel, the company was no longer just a wandering army. They were placing a chokehold on the empire's throat. The move was a masterstroke of strategic insolence. They marched into the nearly deserted city and fortified its walls, transforming it from an imperial outpost into their own sovereign base. From this secure stronghold, they could not be easily dislodged, and they could raid the surrounding Thracian countryside at will. More importantly, they now held the power to tax or block any ship that dared to pass through the straits. This was the ultimate escalation. They were no longer mercenaries asking for a paycheck. They were a state demanding tribute. Their occupation of Gallipoli sent an unambiguous message to Emperor Andronikos. You created this army, you betrayed this army, and now this army owns your front door. How do you negotiate with a tenant who has not only changed the locks, but now controls the only road into your house? The invitation to a grand banquet in Adrianople was a poisoned chalice, and Roger de Flor chose to drink from it. In the spring of 1305, the Byzantine co-emperor Michael IX extended a hand of friendship. summoning the great mercenary captain to a feast meant to heal the rift between the company and the empire. It was a masterful deception. Roger, perhaps hoping to regain his former status or simply lulled by the promise of imperial favor, arrived with a small escort of his most trusted officers, leaving the bulk of his army behind. The hall was filled with the sounds of music and laughter, the air thick with the scent of rich food and false camaraderie. Then, at a prearranged signal, the mood shattered. Imperial guards burst into the room, their swords drawn. The co-emperor Michael himself is said to have given the first blow, a brutal act of regicide against a man he had once called a savior. Roger de Flor, the charismatic heart of the Catalan Company, was cut down amidst the plates and goblets, his body left as a message to every mercenary in his employ. The murder was not just the killing of a commander, it was a deliberate attempt to decapitate the entire company, to throw it into such disarray that it would simply dissolve. For the Catalans, the news was an earthquake. Their leader, their visionary, the man who had led them from Sicily to the gates of Constantinople, was gone, murdered under a flag of truce. The trust they had shattered at Cyzicus was now ground to dust. This was not a covert betrayal by shadowy courtiers, but a public execution ordered by the emperor himself. The assassination marked a terrible point of no return. There could be no more negotiations, no more contracts, no more pretense of service. The company was utterly alone, stranded in a hostile empire, its guiding light extinguished. In that moment of profound crisis, a single chilling question must have echoed through their camp. Could they survive without the one man who had forged them into a legend? Out of the ashes of betrayal, a new kind of leader had to rise. The Catalan Company was adrift, grieving and furious, their charismatic hearts severed by imperial treachery. In this power vacuum, they did not turn to another silver-tongued diplomat. They turned to a man of pure, unadulterated force, Bernat de Rochefort. His election was a statement in itself, a collective decision written in steel. Where Roger de Flor had dreamed of empires and noble titles, Rochefort dreamed of survival and vengeance. He was a warrior's warrior, a commander who led from the front, sharing every hardship and every danger with his men. His charisma was not that of the courtier, but of the hardened veteran who understood that their world had now been stripped down to its most basic elements. There were no more promises to trust, no more contracts to honor. There was only the army, the land, and the enemy. Under Rochefort, the company's strategy underwent a fundamental and brutal shift. The quest for imperial employment was over, replaced by a relentless war of plunder and retribution against the Byzantine Empire itself. They were no longer hired swords. They were a sovereign force of pillage, and the entire region of Thrace was their treasury. Rochefort organized the company into a machine of systematic extraction. They would sweep through the countryside, not just taking food and valuables, but demanding ransoms from towns, seizing livestock, and destroying what they could not carry. This was not random banditry. It was a calculated campaign of economic warfare designed to make the empire bleed for its betrayal, while simultaneously funding their own continued existence. Every burned field was a message. Every plundered monastery was a repayment for their murdered leader. The election of Bernat de Rochefort signaled that the Catalan Company had shed its last illusion. They were not there to save an empire. They were there to break it, piece by piece, until it paid the ultimate price for crossing them. The murder of Roger de Flor had forged the entire company into a single, sharpened blade of vengeance. With Bernat de Rochefort at their head, they erupted from their stronghold in Gallipoli, and the rich province of Thrace became their burning canvas. This was not a war of conquest, but a systematic harvest of terror. Their campaign was a brutal 3-year lesson in the true cost of betrayal. The Catalans moved across the countryside like a force of nature, their scorched earth tactics designed to leave nothing of value for the empire they now despised. They did not merely raid villages, they erased them. Crops were put to the torch, livestock was slaughtered or driven off, and entire populations were given a stark choice: pay an impossible ransom or face the same fate as the Alans. Cities that had felt safe behind their walls soon learned that the Catalans were not a traditional besieging army. They were an infestation of relentless predators. They would surround a town, cutting off all supplies and trade, and then launch sudden, vicious assaults on its weakest points. When a city fell, the sacking was methodical and absolute. Churches were stripped of their gold, storehouses were emptied, and any citizen of wealth was taken for ransom. The terror they instilled was a weapon in itself, a psychological siege that broke the will to resist long before their javelins struck the gates. Why fight to the last man for an emperor who had already abandoned you to these demons? This calculated vengeance served a dual, ruthless purpose. The endless plunder was the company's new treasury, the only way to pay, feed, and arm thousands of men with the imperial gold now cut off. But more importantly, the smoke rising over Thrace was a signal fire of their unchecked power. Every burning field was a declaration to Constantinople. You thought you could destroy us by killing our leader, but you only unleashed something far worse. We are no longer your employees, we are your masters, and this land is our fee. Their vengeance had scorched the countryside, but the ultimate symbol of imperial power still stood untouched across the water. The walls of Constantinople were the most formidable on earth, a triple line of stone that had repelled armies for 1,000 years. To even contemplate an assault was madness, yet in the year 1306, the Catalan Company did exactly that. They turned their gaze from the plundered villages of Thrace and fixed it upon the Queen of Cities herself. This was not a siege in the traditional sense, for they had no massive towers or trebuchets to breach those legendary defenses. Their siege was one of pure, defiant intimidation. They established a blockade on the European side, cutting the land routes that supplied the capital with food and trade from the Balkans. From their base in Gallipoli, their swift galleys patrolled the Sea of Marmara, harassing imperial shipping and daring the Byzantine navy to confront them. They launched brutal raids into the city's sprawling suburbs, the very gardens and estates of the aristocracy, burning villas and demonstrating that no one, not even the emperor's closest friends, was safe. The psychological shock of this act was its true weapon. For the citizens of Constantinople, the unthinkable was happening. The barbarians were not at the gates, they were camped outside them, a constant, visible threat from the hills across the Golden Horn. Every day the smoke from their raids rose on the horizon, a daily reminder that the empire could not protect its own heart. The company, a force of just a few thousand men, was holding the capital of the Roman Empire under a form of house arrest. They could not starve the city into surrender, but they could humiliate its emperor and shatter its aura of invincibility. Though they never seriously threatened to storm the walls, their audacious defiance cemented a legend that would echo for centuries. They were no longer just mercenaries, they were giant slayers who had stared down an empire and forced it to blink. If they could not conquer the city, they would conquer its fear, proving that even the mightiest throne could be challenged by those with nothing left to lose. Even the walls of Constantinople could not provide the food and gold they desperately needed. Trapped between a hostile empire and the open sea, the Catalan Company faced a stark reality. Their war of vengeance was unsustainable without a steady source of supplies and new recruits. In this moment of existential crisis, they made a decision that would shock the Christian world and redefine the very meaning of allegiance. They reached out to the enemy of their enemy, a Turkish warlord named Halil. This was not a formal treaty signed in a palace, but a brutal, pragmatic pact forged in the wilderness. The Catalans needed cavalry, the one element their fierce infantry lacked. Halil and his Turkish horsemen needed the invincible shock power of the Almogavar infantry. Together, they formed a complete hybrid army, a nightmare fusion of Eastern and Western warfare. For the Turks, it was a chance to share in the plunder of the weakened Byzantine Empire. For the Catalans, it was a matter of pure, unvarnished survival. They had been excommunicated, betrayed, and hunted by the Christian emperor in Constantinople. Why should they uphold the ideals of a Christendom that had already cast them out? This alliance was the ultimate declaration that their loyalty was not to faith or to nation, but solely to the brotherhood of the company itself. The news of this unholy pact sent a ripple of horror through the courts of Europe. How could a Christian army, once hailed as saviors of the empire, now march side by side with the very Muslim warriors they were hired to fight? The moral line had not just been crossed, it had been erased. This partnership proved beyond any doubt that the Catalan Company was an entity unto itself, a nomadic state of soldiers that would form any alliance, break any taboo, and challenge any power to ensure its own continued existence. They were no longer mercenaries, they were a force of nature, bound by no law but their own. The devastated fields of Thrace could no longer sustain them. After years of systematic plunder, the land was a barren husk, offering nothing more to feed their growing army or their insatiable need for wealth. With the walls of Constantinople looming as an unbreakable barrier and the entire Byzantine Empire now a hardened enemy, the Catalan Company made a momentous decision. They would turn their backs on the east and march west into the fertile and politically fractured plains of Macedonia. This was more than a change of scenery. It was a strategic pivot into an entirely new theater of war. Macedonia presented a landscape of both immense opportunity and terrifying new dangers. To the north, the rising power of the Serbian kingdom under King Stefan Milutin was expanding its reach, its armies hardened by constant warfare. To the east, the Second Bulgarian Empire watched with a predatory gaze, its tsars eager to reclaim lost glory. The Catalans were no longer fighting a single, centralized empire. They were stepping into a chaotic arena of competing kingdoms, each with its own powerful army and ambitions. Yet it was the lands to the south that held the greatest allure, the rich Frankish Duchy of Athens. Ruled by a French noble family, the de la Roche, this duchy was a jewel of the fading Latin East, a remnant of the old Crusader states. Its lands were lush and prosperous, its cities like Thebes and Athens were legendary centers of wealth and culture, and its armies were composed of the flower of French chivalry, knights who still fought according to the old codes of honor. For the Catalan Company, this was the ultimate prize, a wealthy, well-defended territory that represented everything they were not: aristocratic, established, and seemingly secure. The move into Macedonia transformed their campaign from a war of vengeance into a search for permanent home. They were no longer just raiders, they were hunters stalking the most prestigious game in the region. Every skirmish with a Serbian patrol, every tense standoff with a Bulgarian force was a scouting mission, a test of the local powers. They were learning the lay of the land, probing for weaknesses and calculating the cost of conquest. The Duchy of Athens, with its proud knights and storied cities, stood as the final glittering challenge. Could this band of hardened outcasts, born in the mountains of Aragon and tempered in the fires of betrayal, finally seize a kingdom worthy of their legendary reputation? The invitation arrived like a key sliding into a long-locked door. After years of wandering and war, a legitimate offer of employment landed before the Catalan Company, and it came from one of the most prestigious lords in all of Greece. Walter V of Brienne, the Duke of Athens, needed their particular brand of violence. He was embroiled in a bitter conflict against the Greek rulers of Thessaly, and his own forces of Frankish knights were insufficient for the task. He saw in the Catalans the perfect instrument to crush his enemies, a weapon he believed he could wield and then safely discard. The contract he proposed was everything the company could have wanted on the surface. It promised a full year of generous pay, enough gold to secure their future for a long time, and the official recognition they had been denied since the betrayal at Adrianople. More than that, it offered them a clear and honorable purpose, a chance to step back from their life as feared outlaws and become soldiers of fortune once more. For the company's leadership, the decision was not simple. They remembered the last time they had trusted a Byzantine promise, a memory that ended with Roger de Flor dead at a banquet. Yet the allure was undeniable. Walter of Brienne was a Frankish duke, a man of the Latin West like themselves, not a scheming Byzantine emperor. His word, they hoped, would be different. After intense debate, they accepted. This fateful decision set them on a direct path toward the Duchy of Athens itself, bringing them into the orbit of the very man whose lands they would soon covet. They marched into the service of Duke Walter, not as desperate wanderers, but as a professional army once again, their brutal skills now legally sanctioned. They could not have known that this contract was not a new beginning, but the final step toward a confrontation that would shatter the old order of Frankish Greece forever. The Duke of Athens had made a fatal miscalculation. He looked upon the Catalan Company and saw a simple tool, a sword to be used in his war against Thessaly, and then cast aside. For a full year they served him with their customary brutality, breaking his enemies and securing his borders. But when their contract expired in the spring of 1310, Walter of Brienne faced a dilemma. The company was now a permanent, powerful, and terrifyingly expensive presence within his own duchy. He did not see a potential partner or a force to be integrated. He saw a threat to his own authority and a drain on his treasury. His solution was a page taken directly from the Byzantine playbook, a betrayal disguised as diplomacy. He summoned the Catalan leaders and informed them their services were no longer required. He offered them a fraction of the gold they were owed for their year of service and ordered them to leave his lands immediately. It was a staggering act of bad faith, but the Duke was not finished. He was a man of chivalric honor, and he believed these rugged mercenaries could be swept from the field like any other army. As the Catalans began their slow, deliberate withdrawal, Walter of Brienne assembled the full might of Frankish Greece. He gathered his own knights, summoned his vassals, and hired every available mercenary band. His plan was not merely to see them off, it was to annihilate them in a final, decisive ambush as they marched away, vulnerable and unprepared. He was certain his heavy cavalry would crush these insolent foot soldiers once and for all. The news of the Duke's duplicity did not surprise the Catalans. It validated their deepest convictions. Every emperor, every duke, every nobleman was the same. Their word was worthless, their contracts were lies, and their gratitude always ended at the point of a sword. Walter of Brienne's attempt to cheat and destroy them accomplished the one thing that could unite the company completely. It gave them a common enemy who was foolish enough to meet them on an open field. The betrayal at the river Cephisus did not break their spirit. It forged it into a single cold purpose. They would not flee from this fight. They would turn and face the glittering army of knights, and they would teach the Duke of Athens the same terrible lesson they had taught the Byzantine Empire. You do not ambush the wolves, you only summon them to your own destruction. The river Cephisus flowed through a wide, flat plain that looked perfect for a cavalry charge, and that was exactly what the Catalan Company was counting on. As Duke Walter's army appeared on the horizon, a glittering tide of Frankish knights and their supporting infantry, the Catalans took up a position that seemed to invite their own destruction. They arrayed their lines not on solid ground, but at the edge of a vast marshy area, a landscape they had spent days secretly preparing. While the Duke believed he was hunting a retreating enemy, the Catalans had been methodically transforming the battlefield into a death trap. Under cover of darkness, their Almogavar pioneers had dug countless hidden pits and trenches, then camouflaged them with reeds and shallow water. They had turned the earth itself into a weapon. The battle began with a classic thunderous charge. The Frankish knights, confident in their heavy plate armor and their noble breeding, lowered their lances and spurred their massive warhorses forward. They expected to see the Catalan lines break and scatter before their glorious assault. Instead, the Catalans executed a perfectly timed feigned retreat. Their front ranks gave way, not in a panicked rout, but in a controlled, taunting withdrawal, luring the knights deeper onto the soft, unstable ground. The pursuing cavalry quickly found themselves in a nightmare. Horses plunged their legs into hidden pits, snapping bones and throwing riders. The weight of their own armor, an advantage on solid earth, became an anchor in the clinging mud. The charge dissolved into a chaotic, struggling mass of drowning beasts and trapped men. This was the moment the Almogavars had been waiting for. They stopped their retreat and turned, their signature war cry, the Alamk, rising over the marsh. While the Frankish knights were immobilized, the lightly equipped Catalan infantry swarmed over them. They did not meet the knights in a heroic contest of swords. They moved like butchers, using their long knives to stab at the vulnerable gaps in the knights' armor, at the groin and the armpits, as the noblemen flailed helplessly in the mire. It was a systematic, merciless slaughter. The Frankish infantry, watching their chivalry being systematically exterminated, lost all heart and fled the field. Duke Walter of Brienne, the architect of this catastrophe, fought to the last but was pulled from his horse and cut down amidst his men. The flower of Frankish chivalry in Greece was annihilated in a single afternoon, drowned in a swamp of their own overconfidence. News of the Battle of the Cephisus rippled across Europe with the force of an earthquake. How could a mere band of mercenaries, common foot soldiers, have utterly destroyed an army of the finest knights? The victory was not just a military triumph, it was a social and cultural shockwave. It proved that the old ideals of chivalry were no match for ruthless pragmatism and tactical genius. The Catalan Company had not just defeated the Duke of Athens, they had shattered the very myth of Frankish invincibility. With the Duke dead and his army erased, what now stood between these battle-hardened veterans and the rich, undefended cities of the duchy itself? The road from the Cephisus marsh led straight to the heart of an undefended kingdom. With the Frankish army obliterated and Duke Walter dead, the Catalan Company did not pause to celebrate. They marched, their movements as precise and ruthless as they had been on the battlefield. Their destination was Thebes, the wealthy capital of the duchy and a city famed across Europe for its silk production and immense riches. The terrified citizens, hearing of the total destruction of their protectors, offered no resistance. The gates swung open, and the veterans of 100 brutal skirmishes walked in not as conquerors in a furious sack, but as new masters taking possession of their property. They systematically secured the city's treasury, its bustling workshops, and its sprawling estates. From Thebes, their control rippled outwards. They moved south to the legendary city of Athens itself. Perched beneath the ancient Acropolis, the symbol of classical glory now looked down upon a new, utterly pragmatic ruling class. The Parthenon, already transformed into a Catholic church by the Franks, simply changed hands once more. There was no grand battle for the city. The power of the Duchy of Athens had been broken on a single day in a swamp, and the Catalans simply stepped into the vacuum it left behind. In a matter of months, they had seized not just cities, but an entire system of government, becoming the undisputed rulers of one of the most prosperous regions in Greece. This was the ultimate staggering transformation. The band of homeless mercenaries, cast adrift after the Sicilian War and betrayed by every emperor who hired them, were homeless no more. They were now the lords of a sovereign state, answering to no power but their own. Their leaders distributed the captured lands and titles among themselves, with Bernard de Rochefort and other captains becoming the new barons and castellans of a Catalan duchy. The Almogavar foot soldier who had once hurled javelins for a few coins of gold was now a landowner, a settled man of substance. This was the final, breathtaking step in their journey, the moment a weapon of war became the foundation of a lasting political entity. They had achieved what no other mercenary company in medieval history ever could, carving a permanent home from the body of their defeated employer. What kind of society would these hardened warriors, forged in betrayal and victory, now build upon the ruins of Frankish chivalry? A kingdom won by the sword now had to be ruled by the law. The Catalan Company faced the ultimate test of their transformation, shifting from a mobile army of plunder to a settled government of administration. They did not erase the existing Frankish structure, but rather seized its blueprint and remade it in their own rugged image. The lands of the Duchy of Athens and Thebes were systematically divided among the company's veterans, with the captains, men like Bernard de Rochefort, becoming the new barons and castellans. Each soldier received a parcel of land, a fiefdom earned not by noble birth, but by sheer survival and victory on the battlefield. This was a revolutionary act, turning Almogavar infantrymen into a landed aristocracy overnight. The military structure that had defined them for decades did not dissolve. Instead, it became the very framework of their new state. The company's internal organization, its ranks and loyalties, were simply projected onto the map of Greece. A captain who commanded 100 men on the march now governed 100 estates in peacetime. This ensured that their society remained at its core a society of warriors, always ready to mobilize against any external threat or internal revolt. But how do you rule a population that speaks a different language, follows a different church, and views you as foreign conquerors? The Catalans displayed a surprising pragmatism. They did not attempt to impose their Catalan language or customs by force. Instead, they adopted the feudal administrative systems already in place, the very ones used by the Frankish dukes they had overthrown. Greek bureaucrats who understood the complexities of local tax collection and land management were often kept in their positions. While the new ruling class was fiercely Catholic, they largely allowed the Orthodox Greek majority to continue their religious practices, a tolerance born less of enlightenment and more of cold political calculation. Why stir up a rebellion over a matter of faith when stability was the true prize? From this uneasy coexistence, a unique hybrid culture began to slowly emerge. Catalan knights built their fortresses on Greek hillsides, their children learned the local language, and their legal documents began to blend Latin, Catalan, and Greek terminology. They were no longer just Catalans in Greece, they were becoming something new, a ruling caste that was slowly putting down roots in the very soil they had conquered. This pragmatic approach to governance was their most brilliant and enduring victory, transforming a sudden military conquest into a political reality that would endure for more than 7 decades. They had proven that an army could not only seize a throne, but could also learn to sit upon it. Their new kingdom was a fortress, but its walls were built on fragile ground. For all their military dominance, the Catalan rulers of Athens lacked the one thing every medieval state craved: legitimacy. In the eyes of Europe's crowned heads, they were still usurpers, a band of common soldiers who had murdered a rightful duke and stolen his lands. This political isolation made them a tempting target for any neighbor seeking to win favor with the Pope or simply expand their own territory. Their salvation arrived from across the sea, a ghost from their own past. In 1312, a royal letter arrived from Sicily, sealed by King Frederick III. He was the son of King Peter, the very monarch who had first unleashed the Almogavars decades before. His message was not a condemnation, but a stunning affirmation. Frederick formally recognized their conquest of the Duchy of Athens. More than that, he declared his own young son, Manfred, to be the new duke. This was a political masterstroke that served both parties perfectly. For King Frederick, it was a way to extend his influence into the heart of Greece, planting the banner of the House of Barcelona on a new frontier without spending a single soldier or gold coin. He gained a satellite state and a powerful, battle-hardened ally. For the Catalan Company, it was nothing less than a lifeline. The arrival of a royal duke, even a nominal one, transformed their bloody coup into a seemingly legitimate transfer of power. They were no longer landless rebels, but the loyal vassals of a Sicilian prince, governing in his name. This provided a crucial veneer of aristocratic respectability, a story they could tell the world to justify their rule. Young Manfred became the ceremonial figurehead, a living symbol of their renewed connection to the crown of Aragon, while the company's veteran captains continued to wield the real power, managing the day-to-day affairs of state and commanding its armies. This alliance with Sicily provided a shield against their many enemies, granting them the political cover they desperately needed to consolidate their gains. The Sicilian succession proved that the company had learned the final lesson of power, that a sword can win a throne, but only a crown can make it secure. Their new alliance with Sicily gave them a crown, but it could not control the sea. The Catalan Company now ruled a wealthy duchy, and its prosperity depended on the trade routes that snaked through the Aegean. This brought them into direct and inevitable conflict with the true master of those waters, the Republic of Venice. For generations, the Venetians had treated the eastern Mediterranean as their private lake, their galleys and merchants dominating every port. The rise of a militant, land-based Catalan state was a direct threat to their commercial empire, especially when Catalan ambitions began to press against Venetian-held territories like the strategic island of Negroponte. This was no longer a mercenary skirmish. It was a clash between two sovereign powers, a grinding war of attrition that would last for more than a decade. The conflict erupted not with a single declaration, but through a series of escalating provocations. Catalan privateers, often veterans of the company's naval campaigns, began to prey on Venetian shipping. A merchant vessel laden with silk and spices would vanish between islands, its cargo seized and its crew held for ransom. For the Venetian Senate, this was not mere piracy. It was an act of economic warfare against the heart of their wealth. They responded with their own brutal efficiency, deploying their powerful war galleys to hunt the Catalan raiders and imposing a de facto blockade on the duchy's ports. The sea, once a highway of commerce, became a contested battlefield, with every ship a potential prize and every coastline a potential ambush site. On land, the war was just as fierce. The border between Catalan Athens and Venetian Negroponte became a bleeding scar across the landscape. Venetian forces and their local allies launched raids into the duchy, burning crops and testing the defenses of Catalan-held fortresses. The company, in turn, used its mastery of land warfare to strike back, its Almogavar troops launching swift, punishing attacks on Venetian outposts. This was a new kind of fight for the veterans. They were no longer facing a charging army of knights on an open plain. They were engaged in a protracted struggle of raids, sieges, and diplomatic maneuvering, defending fixed territories against a patient and resourceful enemy. This long war forced the Catalan Company to evolve once more, this time into a true state actor. They could not simply loot and move on. They had to govern, tax, and fund a multi-front conflict. They negotiated alliances with other local powers like the Genoese, who were perpetual rivals of Venice, playing the complex game of Mediterranean politics with a surprising skill born of necessity. The war with Venice was the ultimate test of their transformation. It proved they were no fleeting phenomenon. They were a permanent fixture on the political map, capable of facing down one of the greatest maritime empires in the world and holding their own for over a decade. How does a society built by soldiers learn to endure when the battles never truly end? Decades of relative stability were shattered by the arrival of a ghost from their own past. In 1379, a new mercenary horde descended upon Greece, the Navarrese Company. They were a brutal reflection of what the Catalans had once been, a homeless army of hardened warriors from Navarre, Gascony, and Italy, seeking their own kingdom in the east. For the now established Catalan rulers of Athens, this was more than an invasion. It was a chilling echo of their own rise to power, a direct challenge from a younger, hungrier version of themselves. The conflict that followed would test not their battlefield courage, but the resilience of the very state they had built. The Catalan administration was no longer a mobile army, but a settled government with towns to protect, trade routes to guard, and a complex feudal hierarchy. They faced a force that fought with the same ruthless pragmatism they had once pioneered, a grim irony that was not lost on the aging Almogavar veterans. The Navarrese swept into the duchy, not to conquer its great cities immediately, but to systematically dismantle its countryside, seizing key fortresses like Thebes and challenging Catalan authority at its weakest points. This was a war of raids and sieges, a grueling struggle that stretched the Catalan defenders thin. They could no longer live off the land they were destroying because it was now their own land, their own estates and farms that were burning. The invasion forced the Catalan rulers to prove they were more than just conquerors. They had to be competent governors, mobilizing their resources, rallying their vassals, and defending the territory they had held for nearly 70 years. The fact that they ultimately repelled the Navarrese threat, though at great cost, was a testament to the surprising durability of their political creation. They had built something that could withstand the very forces that had created it, proving that the Catalan Company had truly evolved from a band of wandering soldiers into a lasting, if perpetually contested, power. Their story was no longer just about how to seize a throne, but about the far more difficult task of holding onto it against the relentless tide of history. The loss of Thebes was a wound that bled more than just territory. While the Catalan rulers were locked in their exhausting struggle with the Navarrese Company, a different kind of power was quietly tightening its grip. The Acciaiuoli family of Florence were not mercenaries. They were bankers, masters of finance who had long extended loans to the cash-strapped Catalan dukes, securing their own influence not with swords, but with contracts and debt. Their fingers were already deep in the economic pie of the duchy, and when the chaos of the Navarrese invasion created an opening, they seized it with cold calculation. In 1379, their forces moved not as foreign conquerors, but as claimants to a prize they felt was already owed to them, capturing the great city of Thebes with startling efficiency. This was not a battle lost on a field, but a key city slipping from their grasp through political and financial maneuvering. Thebes was more than just a name on a map. It was the economic engine of their entire domain, the heart of the lucrative silk trade that funded their government and paid their soldiers. To lose it was to suffer a catastrophic financial hemorrhage. The Acciaiuoli, now in control of the city's immense wealth and production, could fund further campaigns against the weakened Catalans with the Catalans' own former income. This event signaled a profound shift in the nature of their decline. They had spent decades perfecting the art of defeating armies, but they had no answer for the slow, insidious power of debt and diplomacy. The fall of Thebes proved that their hard-won kingdom could be dismantled not just by force, but by ledger books and quiet betrayal. How do you fight an enemy that conquers you with gold instead of steel? The Acropolis of Athens had stood for nearly 2,000 years, a silent witness to the rise and fall of empires. In the year 1388, it witnessed one last quiet conquest. The Florentine Acciaiuoli family, having already seized the economic heart of Thebes, now turned their gaze to the duchy's symbolic capital. The final siege of Athens was not a dramatic, blood-soaked assault, but the closing of a slow and methodical stranglehold. The Catalan defenders, isolated and financially crippled after years of war with the Navarrese, and now cut off from their primary source of wealth, could no longer hold the ancient citadel. Their resources were exhausted, Their allies were few, and the will to resist had been eroded by decades of relentless pressure. When the Chiaioli forces finally marched onto the Acropolis, they met little more than a token resistance. It was an ending not with a bang, but with a resigned sigh. The flag of the company was lowered, and the banner of the Florentine bankers was raised over the Parthenon. This moment, more than any battle, marked the absolute and irreversible end of the Catalan Duchy of Athens. After 77 years of rule, the incredible saga of the mercenaries turned lords was over. Their state, born from a shocking victory in a swamp and forged through iron-willed determination, had finally succumbed not to a superior army, but to a superior purse. The fall of Athens closed the book on one of the most unlikely state-building projects in all of medieval history. A band of landless soldiers had not only conquered a kingdom, but had governed it for 3 generations, creating a legacy that would outlive their final defeat. What remains of a kingdom when its last fortress falls? Their battlefield victories were not just triumphs of force, but of a revolutionary military doctrine. The Almogavar way of war shattered the medieval world's obsession with heavy cavalry, proving that a disciplined, light infantry could be the most decisive weapon on any battlefield. Their methods were a brutal symphony of 3 core principles: relentless mobility, psychological disruption, and lethal pragmatism. Unlike the knight who was a fortress on horseback, the Almogavar was a predator of the landscape. He used the terrain itself as an ally, fighting on ground where heavy horses were a liability, in swamps, forests, and rocky hillsides. His minimal armor allowed for astonishing speed, enabling him to choose the time and place of engagement, to strike fast and vanish before a counterattack could form. This mobility was married to a profound mastery of psychological warfare. Their signature war cry, the Alamk, was not a simple shout, it was a weapon designed to terrify. It could break the concentration of a charging knight and spook his horse, disrupting the very foundation of a cavalry assault moments before impact. But the true genius of their system was its ruthless efficiency in close combat. They did not duel, they executed. Their primary weapons, the heavy javelins, were not for skirmishing at a distance. They were armor-piercing projectiles hurled to kill or cripple at the final moment before the lines met. Then, armed only with their long knives, they would swarm a disorganized enemy, targeting the weak points in plate armor with the cold precision of butchers. This was a complete inversion of chivalric combat, where individual glory was replaced by collective, murderous effectiveness. How could a single system prove so devastating against such different foes? Against the massed horse archers of the Turks, their disciplined formations and ability to absorb a charge with javelins, then close for melee, neutralized the Eastern reliance on mobility and arrows. Against the Frankish knights of the West, their feigned retreats and terrain manipulation turned the heavy cavalry's greatest strength, its weight and momentum, into its own instrument of destruction. Long after the fall of the Duchy of Athens, military theorists studied their campaigns. Their emphasis on light professional infantry, on flexibility over brute force, and on the psychological dimensions of combat would echo through the centuries, prefiguring the strategies that would eventually make the armored knight obsolete. They left behind a legacy written not in stone, but in the shattered lances and broken pride of every army that ever underestimated them. But the true legacy of the Catalan Company was never written solely in the land they ruled. It was forged in the stories told about them, a legend that grew far larger than the duchy they built. Their incredible saga was captured in its most vivid and partisan form by one of their own, a soldier and chronicler named Ramon Muntaner. He did not just write a history, he crafted an epic. His chronicle is a masterpiece of propaganda and pride, portraying the company as wronged heroes, men of unmatched virtue and martial skill betrayed by treacherous emperors and arrogant dukes. Through his words, the brutal massacre at Cyzicus became a tale of martyrdom, and the bloody revenge on the Alans a justified act of retribution. Muntaner gave the company a soul and a cause, transforming their desperate struggle for survival into a grand national epic for Catalonia. This romanticized version of events became the bedrock of their myth, ensuring that long after their political power faded, their story would endure. For centuries that followed, the company captured the imagination of poets and playwrights. They appeared not as the complex, often ruthless pragmatists of history, but as romantic adventurers, archetypes of the underdog triumphing against impossible odds. Their tale of a brotherhood of soldiers, bound by an unbreakable code and carving a kingdom from the wilderness, resonated with the romantic spirit of the 19th century. In Catalonia itself, their legend became a powerful symbol of national identity and resilience, a reminder of a time when Catalan courage and ingenuity shook the foundations of empires. The story of the Catalan Company is a chameleon, constantly reinterpreted to fit the needs of the era. For modern historians, they are a fascinating case study in state formation and medieval warfare. For storytellers, they are a timeless narrative of ambition, betrayal, and the indomitable will to not just survive, but to rule. Their physical kingdom is dust, but the legend of the mercenaries who became kings remains as enduring as the stone of the Acropolis they once called home. From a band of landless mercenaries to the sovereign lords of a Greek duchy, the Catalan Company's journey remains one of history's most staggering transformations. They began as hired swords, their loyalty pledged to the highest bidder, but through a series of betrayals and battles, they discovered a far greater power, the unity of their own brotherhood. This bond, forged in the fires of the Sicilian Wars and tempered by imperial treachery, became their true nation, a mobile state of soldiers who answered to no king but their own captains. Their story is a masterclass in the consequences of broken faith. Every betrayal, from the massacre at Sicily to the murder of Roger de Flor, did not destroy them. It only hardened their resolve, teaching them to trust nothing but their own strength and to take what they were owed by right of conquest. The line between mercenary and monarch, once thought to be uncrossable, proved to be nothing more than a river they could march across as they did at Cephesus, drowning the old order of chivalry in a muddy swamp. These warriors defied every established rule, proving that an army could be more than a tool. It could become a lasting political force, carving its own unique and indelible place into the history of the Mediterranean. Their legacy challenges us to reconsider where true power really lies. Is it in ancient titles and inherited thrones, or in the unbreakable will of those who have nothing left to lose? We have walked through these 25 pivotal moments, from their origins in the mountains of Aragon to their final stand in Athens. Now we turn the question to you. Which of these breathtaking twists in their saga did you find most compelling? Was it the shocking victory at Cephesus, the fateful betrayal at Adrianople, or the moment they first occupied Gallipoli? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know which moment you believe truly defined the legend of the Catalan Company.